Your first little assignment is to create a very simple choose your own adventure story or game. And we want to keep it pretty simple. We're going to keep it text-based so that we can use just our input-output things. So this is going to be really, really basic. In order to do a choose your own adventure story, you're going to have to learn how to do a couple of other things in Jigsaw. So usually a choose your own adventure story works, that you have one or you have, two paths at the end of the story or the end of the section. And you go down one path and one thing happens, and you go down another path and another thing happens. So you might go down one path and your character falls in love, and if you go down the next path, your character dies. So those are some of the ways to do it. Now we're not going to be able to do anything all that complicated, especially we don't want to write a whole lot of text. So we're going to try to keep it simple. But in order to do that, you're going to want to use some if and if else statements. So an if statement in programming simply means that if a certain statement is true, then you're going to do one thing. And then over here you have in your if-else statement, if a certain thing is true, you're going to do one thing. Otherwise, if it's not true, you're going to do something else. And there are different scenarios under which you might do that. So if you have, if you have simply two paths, an if-else statement might work. So that if something is true, if you choose option A, one thing happens. However, if you choose the other option, this other thing happens. So that might be one way to do it. However, if you have, three different options, what you might end up doing is having a series of if statements so that if this thing is true, then this thing is true, then this thing happens. But if this other thing is true, then this thing happens. So we're going to look at a couple of those basic scenarios and how you might use them in your choose your own adventure story. Okay, so we've got our if true statement here, and we need a statement to evaluate. So we're going to go to input output, and we're going to ask somebody to put their name in like we did before. So we're going to set this to be name, and we're going to type in the question, what is your name? Like that. And we want to then do something if this name is equal to something. So we're going to start with that variable. So we get this. We'll get an answer to this question. And we want to say that, let's say if the name is equal to Cindy, we're going to do something with that. So let's pull over a print statement. And we might put in here, hello Cindy, if their name is Cindy. Now we learned, of course, last time that we could actually just print the name. We could put hello plus name in here, and that would work. So, but this is a hard-coded way of doing it, and it demonstrates your if statement. So let's run this and see how that works. So I'm going to put Cindy in here, and sure enough, I get hello Cindy. Now let's try to put something else in here. If I put John in here, I get nothing. So nothing happens. If your name doesn't equal Cindy, then you're out of luck. Nothing happens. So let's say we want to do something a little more complicated. We want to have something else happen if that statement isn't true. So what we're going to do is if the name is equal to, let's actually add a little something here. Let's add, if you remember our statement, so we can put a statement up here and we can set it equal to a name. Actually, we don't want to give it the same variable. We want to give it a different variable. So we're going to say my name, and we're going to put my name is equal to Laura. And we're going to ask our person what their name is, and then we're going to say if their name is equal to my name, then we want to do something. So you'll notice here that I have double equals. I don't think I mentioned that before, So whenever you're comparing two items to see if they're equal to each other, you're going to use a double equals. When you're setting something equal to something, you use a single equals. And Jigsaw actually does this for you in the statement and in your ask block here. But when you're putting expressions into if statements, when you're doing an if test, you're going to be typing those in yourself. So you need to remember the double equals there. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if the name that they input is equal to my name, we're going to print something. Maybe we'll print, hey, cool, that's my name too. We'll put that in there. And then if it isn't the same as my name, we'll still print something, but it won't be as interesting or as exciting. So maybe we'll say hello, and we'll put the name that they've entered in here. So we're going to run this, and I'm going to put in, let's put in Howard. And because Howard is not equal to Laura, it prints hello Howard. So that's kind of cool. And what if we put in, let's test if we put in the exact name. And sure enough, it prints, hey cool, that's my name too. So that's pretty cool. If statements don't have to be equal to, they could also be greater than or less than. And normally you think of that with numbers, and we're going to show an example of that in a minute. But you can also determine where a string falls in the alphabet. So we could say if the name that you enter is less than, let's say, G, so if it begins with anything from A to F, we're going to do one thing. Otherwise, if it's greater than that, then we're going to do something else. So let's type that in. So we're going to say your name begins with A through F. And otherwise, we're going to say your name begins with G through Z. Well, it's not really halfway through the alphabet. It's sort of cheating. But let's test this out. We can leave this statement in there even though we're not using it. And we're going to ask for a name. And let's start with Betty. And it says your name begins with A through F. Cool. And now we're going to enter, let's say, Harriet. And your name begins with G through Z. So that works. So that's one comparison that you can make. Now what if you want to compare numbers? We talked a little bit about the difference between strings and other kinds of things. We're going to talk a little bit more about that right now. So when you ask a question, and we're going to ask a question here, we're going to ask what grade someone is in. What grade are you in? The response, even if it's a number or looks like a number, is actually a word or a string or a collection of letters and spaces is how the computer interprets it. But if we want to do a comparison like we did up here, and we want to say, okay, if you're in below 6th grade, you're too young, and if you're above 8th grade, you're too old, or something like that, that you have to be in middle school in order to play this game or continue on this adventure, we're going to need to change this input that we get from a string into a number so that we can actually do the greater than, less than comparison. So what we want to do with this if statement is we want to see if our grade, if it's less than 6, we're going to print you're too young. And if it's otherwise, we're going to continue. Now we could put, in fact, let's do that. Let's make it a little more complicated. So let's take this out. So And this will just demonstrate how you can do some if statements in a row. So we've got a couple of three different conditions we want to test. We want to say if your grade is less than 6, then you're too young. If it's, let's do the last condition next. If it's greater than 8, if grade is greater than 8, then you're too old. So we're going to print you're too old. And if it's in the middle, then we want to say, okay, you're fine. So we're going to have to do a couple of different things here. We want it to be greater than, your grade is greater than 6, and grade is less than 8, less than or equal to 8, right? And greater than or equal to 6. So you can either be in 6th grade, 7th grade, or 8th grade. So all we did is combine some expressions here. So we have our grade greater than or equal to 6, or less than or equal to 8. So that means that 6, 7, and 8 should all qualify for this test. So we're going to try that out, and we're going to print here, you're just right. Okay, so it should evaluate all of those things. But we still have our problem of grade is actually a string. So let's just, without changing it, let's test and see if this is tests out correctly. And I'm going to guess that it's not going to. So we're going to put our name in here, and we're going to tell it, let's try telling it we're in 4th grade. And it thinks you're both too young and too old. Weird. So that doesn't work at all. We don't want that to happen, right? We want it to actually evaluate these if statements correctly. Let's see, we're losing our screen here. There we go. Okay, so one way I could change this, there's a nice little function that turns any string or anything into an integer. Now I could go through my if statement didn't take. Grade is less than 6. Okay. I could go through, and where I have all these if statements, I could put a little function around grade, and it looks like this. It's just called int. And we just put parentheses around it, just like we have parentheses around our print statements and our ask statement. This is the same kind of thing. And what this does is it says, okay, I'm going to take whatever this is and I'm going to turn it into a number. But I don't want to do that 3 times. That just seems crazy. It just seems really crazy because I don't want to waste time like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our statement, and we're going to put underneath this grade, our variable is still grade, so that means it's going to take whatever grade is set to. And we're actually going to do our conversion here. So we set our grade equal to the number version of that. So it comes in as a word version, and it looks like the number version, but the computer doesn't know that it's a number version, and it's going to turn it into a real number version that the computer can read. So let's try this and see if we get the right answers. So I'm going to put my name in here, and I'm going to tell it, let's try 9th grade. And sure enough, it says you're too old. That's cool, that actually worked. Let's try another grade. Let's try 4th grade, and that should tell us it's too young. Okay, that worked too. And we'll try another, and let's say we're in 7th grade, and we're just right. So now that works. So that was a little bit complicated, but it's a lot not as complicated as you might think. So basically, we looked at some if statements and some else statements. So we looked at less than, which you can do with strings, less than and greater than. And then we looked at how to take a string, something that the computer reads as a word, and turn it into an integer using the int function. And then we used that newly created integer to compare it to what we wanted and told it that it was, where we were in our if statement. So we looked at how to do a straight up if statement with no other options, an if, and just do something. We looked at an if else, so if one thing is true, do this, otherwise do something else. And we looked at a series of if statements where we have a little bit more complicated decision making. So that's should help you get started a little bit with your choose your own adventure story. And in the next video, I'm going to show you a little bit how to nest some ifs together.